Okay, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Hello. So to this meeting, I will call the meeting to order at 6:33 p.m. And this is the only meeting of the year that I call to order until we've elected a chair. And then once we've elected a chair, I will turn it over to that individual. So we'll start with public comment. Celeste, do you see anybody on your end?
There's nobody.
Okay, we have nobody here, so we'll leave some time for public comment at the end of the meeting. I'd like to, before we jump into the organizational part.
Does the dog have a public comment?
Do we know who we can mute if whoever's.
Who has a dog?
I have an item, a personnel issue that I would like to bring to executive session. It's not.
I move after the reflection of the norms that we add to the agenda an executive session for the purposes of discussing a personnel issue. Jane.
And I second.
Thank you. Any discussion about that? I apologize, but it seemed like the most prudent thing was to do it now versus calling you together in the near future to meet again. Okay, there's no discussion. All in favor of adding this agenda item, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay, thank you, that passes. Okay, so our first item under organization is to elect a board chair. So I'd like to take a motion.
I move that Herb Ogden be nominated.
Is there a second?
Second.
Jane, seconded by Jane. Any discussion or any other further nominations? Okay, I think we're ready to vote. All in favor of electing Herb Ogden as the Taconic and Green board chair? Raise your hand, please. Okay, any opposed? Okay, Herb, congratulations. You have won the seat, earned the seat, been voted into the seat of chair of Taconic and Green School Board. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
I appreciate your confidence. By the way, the record should reflect I abstained. Okay, the next item is to elect a vice chair. Do we have nominations? And I have one, which would be Dick Dale. It needs a second. Seconded by Dave Chandler, it looks like. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Seeing none. All those in favor of Dick Dale for vice chair, would you please raise your hand? And anyone opposed, please raise your hand. Don't see anybody abstaining.
I abstain.
Okay, so that passes with Dick abstaining. Next item is to elect a clerk.
I move that we nominate Mr. David Chandler.
Okay, Dick Dale moves down David Chandler. Is there a second? Second by Jim Salzgiver. Any other nominations for clerk? Seeing none. All those in favor of David Chandler for clerk, would you please raise your hand? Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining? Okay, all right, David, you are the clerk again. Thank you very much.
I move that the following people be nominated if they wish to continue serving to the BRSU. That would be Jim Salzgiver, and David Chandler, and myself, and Deb Lanus, and Jane Worley.
Okay. Are there any additional nominations? If there were, we would have to pick the top 5. Not seeing any. I'm going to close the nominations and take what Dick made as a motion to elect those 5, unless somebody objects to doing it that way. All in favor of electing the 5 people listed by Dick, who are David Chandler, Jim Salzgiver, Dick Dale, Deb Linus, and Jane Worley, would you please raise your hand? Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining? That appears to have passed unanimously. Thank you very much.
I move, I
Excuse-
move
excuse-
to
excuse me.
elect,
Wait, there's a,
I
Question.
don't have a second for that.
the second, I think, was,
Jim.
Jim?
Jim.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead, Dick.
I move to re-elect David Chandler and myself as the Staff Negotiations Committee representative.
Okay, is there a second to that? Seconded by Mel Virgilio. Are there any additional nominations? Looking around, I don't think I see any. All right, all those in favor of, excuse me, electing Dick Dale and, oh dear.
David.
And David Chandler as the Negotiations Committee representatives, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, raise your hand. All right, they are unanimously elected then.
I move to authorize the chair. Most of the motions in the subsequent are all pro forma, need to be voted on, but we do them in order to operate our school system. So I move that the chair be authorized to sign previously approved contracts.
Moved by Dick, is there a second? Seconded by Jane, okay, Jane Worley. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor, would you please raise your hand? Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously as far as I can see.
Mhm. I move to authorize the chair to sign previously approved correspondence.
Okay, moved by Dick. Is there a second? Seconded by David. I have a question on that one, Dick. To what extent do you mean previously approved? Do you mean
That would be correspondence like the most recent letter that we sent the legislature, where the board has authorized the creation of a letter. It gets vetted and approved, and then you have the capacity on behalf of the board to finalize the final draft.
Okay.
That's what it's meant.
Okay, so it's simply signing something that has already been approved by whatever group the board designated, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually approving the board approved right to send the correspondence. And when the final product gets done, you can sign it other than wait for the next board meeting.
Okay, but just to clarify, this isn't asking me to sort of freelance.
No.
Okay. All right, any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. All opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Passes unanimously.
The appointment of a truant officer is voted by the board, but usually the superintendent nominates that person. And in the interim, since the publishing of the agenda, the superintendent has recommended that we appoint Tim Oliver, who is the school safety officer and the bullying coordinator and adjudicator.
Okay, so there's a nomination of Tim Oliver. Is there a second? Is there a second? Second by Deb Linus. All right, any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Seeing none, that passes unanimously.
And while there can be other places where the agenda is posted, I move that we designate agenda posting locations, the schools and the post office.
Okay. Actually, those are additional locations because the law requires them to be posted at town offices.
Okay.
Second. Seconded by Alex Wild. Any discussion? Jane.
Jane.
I just had a question. I was curious, do they ever post those at libraries?
It can be, but because some of the libraries are not necessarily open and convenient. So if you wanted to post it, for example, at a library, you could. What we're talking about is where we're going to post them.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor of the motion, wait a minute, is it, Celeste, is there a second to that motion?
Yes, it's Alex.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously.
We are required to designate an official newspaper, but that doesn't mean that we don't publish it elsewhere. And therefore, we're going to continue what we did previously to designate the newspaper as the banner,
Bennington Banner, yep.
Bennington Banner.
Yep. Dick Dale's motion, is there a second? Seconded by Mel Virgilio. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anyone abstaining, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously.
I move that the Board of Education members be paid in February.
Okay, moved by Dick to pay the board in February. Is there a second? Seconded by Mel. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously.
I move that the board members agree to sign the code of ethics in one of two manners, either scan it and sign it and send it back to Celeste and/or mail it to the BRSU.
Okay, moved by Dick. Is there a second? Seconded by Alex. Okay. Any discussion? Deb?
Oh, I was just going to say for those of us who are new to the board that we've been doing this every year for quite a while on the recommendation of the Vermont School Boards Association. And right now we have actually no concerns about, we're a highly ethical board with no concerns, but for the day when things begin to go haywire, this is just good insurance.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. And that passes unanimously. And you'll find that form is packet page 4.
I move that a motion to reauthorize the superintendent to sign financial orders. This is particularly useful in the absence of board meetings and absence of a chair, and it's customary and normal.
Moved by Dick. Is there a second? Seconded by Jim Salzgiver. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously.
I move the attached agenda packet page 5, which included all of the scheduled meetings. That doesn't mean that there can't be others, and that the dates that are submitted on that page be accepted. They can and sometimes have been changed by board vote subsequent to this, but at least it gets our required meetings on board.
Motion by Dick to establish the dates that are on packet page 5. Is there a second? Seconded by Lee Lopresti. Note that, by the way, this does not state the locations, and I'm assuming this is deliberate because we don't know yet whether how long we'll keep on meeting by Zoom and whether we will start rotating physical locations at some point or other. Is that right, Randy?
That is exactly right. So
When we went to Zoom, we said as soon as we possibly can, we're going to get back into the business of rotating the schools.
Well, let's not try rotating the schools. Let's just rotate the meetings.
Well, I want to rotate the schools. I'd like to move Courier to where MEMS is.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, raise your hand. That passes unanimously. And Dick, would you mind reading the board goals for us to review?
The board goals include goal number 1, governance. The board will implement a governance model that looks to the future and fosters a high level of effectiveness and efficiency. Goal 2, community engagement. The board will use proactive approach to community engagement. Goal 3, equity. The board will use the operational definition of equity as an overarching guide in policy development and decision making. Goal 4, legislative action. The board will keep abreast of legislative issues and take action when needed to support the district.
Thank you. And part of the purpose of reading these at every other meeting is for us to do a self-check about how well we are following these goals. Anybody have any comments on that?
There has been a suggestion by Ben Freeman, I believe, but seconded by a number of other board members in the past, that we elevate our definition of equity to a specific policy. And I'd like to make sure that that gets on the agenda in a subsequent meeting.
I imagine everybody would agree with that. Jim? Oh, that's just a thumbs up. Okay. Yeah. All right. Anything else about goals at this point? Not that we can't revisit it. All right. We have a consent agenda, and for those of you who are new, just a reminder that if you see something there that you want to discuss, then you move to take it out of the consent agenda. Otherwise, we pass the whole thing.
I move the consent agenda pending no objection to everything there.
Moved by Dick to pass the consent agenda. Is there a second?
This is where, Jeff, you need to speak.
Right. I was waiting for the second, but that's fine. I'll be happy to speak now. My understanding is that under agenda item 5C, hiring, that will include an item whereby we would be ratifying the appointment of my wife as the acting or interim principal at Floodbrook. So I certainly think it would be highly ethically inappropriate for me to act upon that. So I'm going to abstain on when we vote on this particular motion.
Actually, the whole thing has been moved, and since you weren't at the minutes, you probably would abstain from that.
Right.
Yeah.
And the teacher contract renewals is a recommendation of the superintendent and is not generally commented on.
I think just for purposes of minutes, if the minutes reflect that Jeff abstained from the vote on the consent agenda, that will take care of it all.
Right. I think it would be helpful, though, just to put in the minutes also the rationale as to why I'm abstaining.
Correct. Yep. Can we do that, Celeste? You don't have to say yes. All right. We have motion by Dick. We still do need a second. Seconded by David. All right. All those in favor of the 4 items on the consent agenda, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay. Passed with Jeff Wilson abstaining.
With the stated reason to be included in the minutes.
Yep. Okay. Community engagement update is the next item.
So I'll get us started. I don't anticipate this taking half an hour, although sometimes you surprise me. So we have all of the data collected from the survey, The community engagement committee has not met, so I would propose that that committee meets this month to review the data. But I would also recommend that what we'll do is we'll take all the data and put it into a spreadsheet and share it with everybody. It will be long, so be prepared for that because there's a lot of information. You asked open-ended questions and people had a lot to say. But I think it's really important for you as a board to have an opportunity to look through and read for yourselves what the people in our communities identify as the purpose of education. So everyone will get a copy of that. Everyone will take a look at it. The community engagement team will meet to really talk about it and come to the April meeting with, I would propose we'll come up with some sort of an activity for us to do in order to move it forward, but everyone will come prepared to review it. Bob Niles has already spent time kind of pulling out some themes so he can contribute to that conversation. But I would say that this is from my perspective, it's important for you to all have a chance to see what people said.
And we have what, over 500 responses, do we?
Yes.
Well, any discussion on the plan to deal with the community engagement and the responses? David, and then Melanie.
Just quickly, I just wanted to know what we hoped we would get. What kind of response? Is 500 in the ballpark? Is it way more than we expected? Is it way less? Do you have any thoughts on that, either Deb or Bob?
Bob would be the one.
Yeah, it's actually closer to 600. It's like the last I checked, it was like 587. And I think I remember we had just before we put out the survey, we talked that we felt that the parents would be strong in supporting it. We were hoping to get around maybe 250 to 300, and I think we got that and more from the parents. And then we all the extra efforts that and the reach out to targeted groups, kind of added on to the feedback. So I think 600 or close to 600 is good. You always want more, but it's a nice number to have. It's not statistically valid. Beware of that. It wasn't designed to do that. But it's just raw. It's like a super focus group. But I've had a chance to read most of it. It's really interesting reading, and I think you'll all enjoy sifting through it and seeing what people have to say.
Just to put that number in perspective, I think the total number of votes cast in the March election of the school district was around 2,900. So this is, a sizable proportion of the folks who voted.
Yeah, and you're going to see. I mean, there's a few of the responses that are short, in a phrase or a word or two, but most people really put some time and effort into it, and it shows. So this was not an easy ask, and it's a good, healthy response.
And
I think, Mel, did you have a question about that?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to find out if there is, and this is kind of an unofficial, not a voting question, but if the board as a whole has an appetite for an afternoon to look at this, or do you think one meeting would suffice? I mean, with that many responses, I almost feel like this could be a really solid 3-hour afternoon kind of workshop. If it was only a couple hundred. And again, this is a straw poll. I know we'll kind of decide this when we get to the community engagement meeting, but I guess before we get to that meeting, any initial thoughts from the rest of the board? Like, how deep do you want to go before we disseminate?
I think I'd like.
I think Deb is waiting to be recognized
Oh,
next.
well, unless someone has an answer to Mel.
Dick?
I think we ought to take a look. There were a number of themes that surfaced, and moving forward, we had always said we didn't know what we were going to get. We didn't know how it was going to read. We didn't know, therefore, how to respond to the whole thing. I agree that it may take a more concerted workshop in order to work through the themes and actually come up with the ends policy. My hope is that while we get this other thing that we get the placeholder ends policy included so that we can look at what the placeholder policy is and how much it needs to be modified in order to respond effectively to the public. So I agree with you, Mel, but I think it's a little early to get that scheduled.
Okay, just in response to that, I guess that feels kind of like news to me. I thought looking at this was before we put together a placeholder. I guess I didn't understand the intention of putting a placeholder in place.
We had a placeholder because we needed one in
Right.
order to move forward. But we have a placeholder that was kind of a consensus placeholder that was put together by Jackie and the principals and some teachers and all sorts of stuff. So we have one, but it isn't what the public wants. And I just want to make sure that we all are aware of how much modification we need to do in order to get us to where we actually wanted to be a year ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say that for those of us who weren't there when we started this way before COVID hit. And so we're finally getting around to finishing it up. But the point of it is to draft a policy, an overarching policy that guides all of our work, an ends policy that is driven by what our constituents ask of us.
Any other discussion on the community engagement update? Seeing none, the next item would be, I think Randy's essentially, which is to review the interpretation of policy 2.6, which has to do with asset protection. And I'd refer you to packet page. I believe this begins on packet page 17. Randy, is there anything in pages 17 through 22 that you want to particularly call our attention to, first of all?
There is not. I didn't, as Sue and I worked through this over the last couple of months, we really kind of took it item by item. So there's nothing that I would say to you is more or less important to look at. They're all the components that we pulled out of this particular policy. So this is the first monitoring report that I've created for you. It happened to be one that had a lot of pieces to it. So it is longer than probably any of us would like, but I did not, given all of the pieces, I didn't see any other way to approach it. So I guess, Herb, I'll defer to you about how you would like to go through this. We can, go through it piece by piece, or board members can ask questions or make comments on anything that they have questions about. It's up to you about how you'd like to kind of read through this.
Let me suggest this then. Could I just have a show of hands about how many board members presently have either a comment or a question? Because if there's lots, then I think I'll call for them on each page. If there's not very many, I think we'll just do a free for all. So how many folks already have something they want to say about it? I see 1, 2, 3. So I think I'll just start calling and we may skip around some. Dick, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I wanted to say I read through them very carefully. I thought that each interpretation was fair and reasonable, which is one of our criteria. I thought the evidence that you presented was also fair, independent, and effective. So I found nothing that I read that I could quibble with.
All right, David.
Okay, thank you. I agree with Dick. This is really good. Thank you, Randy. I did have some nitty gritty, nitpicky things on under number 2, allowing personnel to allow unbonded personnel access to material amounts of funds.
Back on
I
page
was-
17, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if there is a term, is there an actual interpretation of the word material? Is that like $15,000 or is that a particular amount?
Sue, I'll defer to you on this. There's nothing in this policy itself that identifies what a material amount of money is. But when we were, well, I said I was going to defer to you and then I'm talking. That's a terrific strategy. But as we were discussing this, we were determining that material amounts of money were anything that would really impact the budget in a meaningful way. So, that's the lens with which we were looking at it. Because there wasn't any one number. We did talk about that a lot, that we would put that sort of intentionally worked, for lack of a better word. You could make an argument one way or the other for any number that we selected. I don't know, Sue, if you want to add to that or not, but
No. I mean, I think, material is subjective and yeah, it's going to be different depending upon the total amount of money that you might be looking at. And so, yeah, there is no specific amount of money that we're assigning to the word material.
So your interpretation is that it's a part of a percentage, some kind of percentage of whatever that budget line item total amount is, not the total budget.
Yeah. So if it's going to create a hardship for the district, meaning that you're going to recognize that there's a variance there. And if you're talking about $1 in a $1,000 line item, that's not something probably that's very material. So it's not even necessarily associated with the entire budget, but the piece of the budget maybe that we're looking at that particular point in time.
I think I saw a third hand a moment ago. Oh, Deb.
Yeah, I just wondered, Randy, did you find any value in this process? Was it helpful or surprising, or was it just a lot of work?
that's a great question. I found it more valuable than I thought I would find it. And it helped me to have a greater understanding of details and to talk through with Sue, how do we do this? Or how might we do this? And for me to ask questions to have a greater understanding of some of the details that I didn't have an understanding of. So it was, frankly, I was nervous about doing it. It was my first one. I found the process to be valuable, time consuming and valuable. I've actually started the next one I'm going to present to you primarily because I found this to be a helpful way to organize information and for me to learn more. The next one I'm going to present to you is 2.5 and it's emergency superintendent succession. And that just going through this exercise was very valuable as I was drafting that one as well. So yeah, it is a more positive experience than I would have expected it to have been.
I just want to follow up on David's question a little bit. Are there things that fairly often do come up that are immaterial expenses that just happen in the normal course of things?
I wouldn't necessarily, yes, but I wouldn't necessarily say they fall under asset protection. So I would say that when immaterial items might come up, they're probably under one of the other financial policies. And I believe we actually have a place in, I don't know if it's 2.4, I'm not sure which one it is, 2, 3, or 4, where we tell you that when these kind of errors arise, we're going to let you know that they happened. We're going to summarize that for you so you're aware that they happened. And those are things like a late tax payment or those kinds of, they're immaterial in dollars. And they're sort of normal for the course of doing business, that these types of small errors will happen along the way, and then we fix them and we will explain to you what happened and how we fixed it. That's what I can think of that sort of affects materiality, but not with respect to asset protection.
Other comments or questions?
I did see some other things if I can.
Okay, Dave.
And maybe this wasn't the intent, Randy, but I was looking at packet page 18 And under 3, when you say compliance will be demonstrated when, and I was wondering if you wanted any other suggestions for how else compliance could be demonstrated. I wondered if, since so this is nitpicky, so I can share this with you privately, but the availability of operating manuals or other appropriate use guidelines, making that available, is that part of it, or does that come under what the education tech directors and those people present to you?
I'm not sure I'm following. So you're saying that having the manuals would be, David, can you just say that a little bit differently?
Oh, yes, like if you've got a photocopier,
Mhm.
is there a little bit of a guideline thing posted by each copier so people know generally what's the use and what's the abuse? And maybe I'm getting too nitty gritty, and that's part of your own figuring out what works best for the appropriate use. So I withdraw that question, and You guys will figure out what you need to do.
Okay.
My only other thing was under evidence, under that same thing, I believe you left out a word.
Oh, okay. Tell me
Under-
where.
Under number 1, where it says no unplanned or equipment replacements needed due to improper use of facilities.
Okay, I see it. Okay.
And I have a couple of follow-ups, sort of same general tenor. If you look farther down that page, under number 4, compliance will be demonstrated when. I think there might be something missing at the end of number 1.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't know what we would have dropped out of there. All right, I'll get back to you about that. I'll have to reread it and figure out what we omitted on there.
There's something similar on page 19, the next to the last line, which is number 4. Or maybe I should just email you about these. There's, I think.
Yeah, if there's a couple, if it's yeah, that's totally fine. If it tends to be sort of a editing issue, but I'm happy to also bring it back with those highlighted.
Yeah. I did have one substantive question
Sure.
back on packet page 17. The policy that you're attempting to follow, 2.6.1, uses the words insurance in an amount greater than the average for comparable organizations. And I was wondering, this question either for you or for Sue, how easy was it to figure out what the average for comparable organizations was? Is this a realistic goal?
Well, yeah, we're part of an insurance pool. So we have the same insurance coverage as the majority of districts, SUs across the state, because we're all in one big pool.
Right, but the goal itself, the policy itself, says greater than the average. So, how do you, if we have the same insurance everybody else does, then it's the same as the average. It's not greater. So should the policy be changed?
Where is greater?
It's in the policy itself. It's not in the interpretation.
Right, but is that listed anywhere in what we're reading? Where is it?
It's
Boldface number 1.
I'm sorry, everybody's talking at once. In number 1?
Yeah, boldface.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Randy, what do you think? That's the way the policy's written. I think it's unreasonable to ask our district to insure ourselves at a greater amount than our comparable school districts. I think that's odd.
Well, it struck me that way, but I just wanted to ask.
Yeah, I didn't pull that out, looking at interpretation when you read through. I didn't pull that out as a theme of the fact that we were looking for having greater insurance or more insurance than other districts.
Maybe we have to fix the policy.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about. I guess really the question would be to you as a board, is that really what you want? Do you want us to be insured at a greater degree than other districts? Is that something that's important to you? And if it is, we can certainly make that happen, but I'm not sure if that is something that is of value to you.
Anybody have any thoughts on that? Deb?
I don't even know how that got in there in the first place. You know, I don't remember how we came to that. It wasn't something we all agreed was important.
Jim?
Just an opinion would be that we should do equal to, and the fact that we have Visbit means we're consistent with everybody else. That makes perfect sense. I would just say, you know, equal to, or, you know, equal or greater than, whatever.
Anybody else have any thoughts on this?
Jane?
I actually just like comparable, because I think if you say equal or something else, then that's even more specific, like being held to a number, rather than looking at you want comparable coverage. You don't necessarily want the exact dollar amount, right?
So
You might,
should we perhaps begin a list of things in the policy governance policies that need to be tweaked a little bit and put this on the list then? Because currently we're asking the administration to do something that we don't seem to think is reasonable, and we're not even sure how it ought to be done.
I think that this is exactly the reason to go through this process, because it puts you and me in a position to discuss it. Does this make sense? Is it reasonable? Is it a policy that aligns with where we want to be going? And so, yeah, I think I'll do whatever you want to do on it. Just let me know how you'd like us to proceed on the language.
Would it be possible, as we make this list of changes to the policy, that we have a list and make it a small item? I look around the room and comparable or equal and greater than, or greater than, all seem to be what we're in favor of. And Lee has a question.
Oh, yes, Lee.
I'm just trying to figure out how those two phrases relate, because it looks to me like there's two actual phrases there. You fail to insure against theft or casualty losses to 80% of replacement value and against liability. That seems to be where the comparable organizations is. And it should only, I think it might be better, again, when we revise it, to think about making that two sentences rather than one. Because if we're doing it to 80%, we're not doing it greater than the average for comparable organizations. We hopefully are doing it to the same.
Yeah, so I think whoever's revising this wants to bear in mind there's actually two different ideas here.
Right, that's all I'm saying.
I think it would make sense for Randy, for you and I to sort of, since we're talking about the fact that this particular item needs revision, maybe you and I should talk about, to make a suggestion back to the board after we talk about what makes sense based on how we're insured. You know, and as Jim said, this is the pool that we don't want to leave. We want to be a part of it. We benefit from being part of this organization. So let's suggest language that confirms what we're doing, that everybody is already in agreement with. Does that make sense?
I'm comfortable with that if the board is.
Yep. I see a few thumbs up saying anybody in the board have a problem with that idea? Doesn't look like it. No. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, other comments or questions on the policy interpretation here? Well, I'm sorry to be the sticky wheel, but I have one more at least. If we look at the bottom of packet page 20, the next to the last line says, I interpret public image to mean public information about the district. And I'm wondering, is this just information that we've passed out, or does it mean something else?
I'll tell you, I spent a lot of time on this because it was so different than all of the other parts of the policy. And so it took me time to think about what really is this trying to capture. And my interpretation of that was really centered on this idea that the organization itself is an asset, right? It is an asset that requires protection. That's where I went with this. So then, right, so this idea of public image, well, all of these concepts, I spent a lot of time, and Sue and I went back and forth and talked through it. We revised this many times, and this was longer, the public image one. And we ultimately just boiled it down to this idea that any information that's out to the public about the district. So all of that, anything that we put out there as public information, it is informing a public image of the district. And so that's where we ended up landing. I'm certainly open to any level of discussion because this was a particularly interesting journey in interpreting.
Before I say anything else, anybody else have a comment or a question on this particular piece? Sam, did you want to say something? No, okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, if we, let's analyze it this way. The policy, governance policy says one of the things the superintendent won't do is endanger the organization's public image, so forth and so on. If we substituted public information for it, would it make sense? Because then it would say, okay, you can't endanger the organization's public information. Well, what's that?
Yep. So keep going with it. So tell me what I'm very interested in, sort of how, because keep talking through that and see where it goes.
Well, I think I'll let Dick put his oar in first.
Okay. When I think about the long-term reputation, which is basically what I think this particular aspect is trying to deal with, reputations can all of a sudden go sour in a sudden rush of new information or false information that is widely believed by the public. And what my interpretation of that particular article was that the superintendent isn't going to do anything to contribute to incorrect information about what our district is doing. And that is an image, and image based on reputation within the fabric of the community. And so I think that the words that are used, image, to me means what I just said it meant. And if you just deal with information, well, if you give out false information, your image is going to be potentially changed very quickly. But a superintendent that's giving out incorrect information is now putting the entire district at risk. So I think that we're fully protected by the actual words that they came down to. That's my feeling.
So following up, may this be a case where it's not necessary to interpret the word public image?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to not interpret it, but I'm also very open to, hearing more thoughts.
Jane.
Well, the attorneys probably have the better handle on this, but when I think of public image, I start also thinking about those legal aspects of libel and slander. So I somehow start thinking about maybe what a district or superintendent is held to is having to do with almost like the value of transparency. I don't know, something like that. But I don't really, my wheels are spinning. I'm just telling you some of the thoughts that come up for me when I just read that. So I can appreciate what you've been through, Randy.
Mel.
I don't like any of the wording on this in general, mostly because, I think we've all experienced situations where people try not to endanger the public image by then being less transparent with the realities of a situation. And in reading it the way that it's written, I get the impression that that might be acceptable to forego transparency to make things look better. And I would hate to give that impression. I recognize that, Randy interpreted it as such, and she said that we, our policy work is transparent and publicly available. That's great. That I would prefer that was more the goal, to be transparent, rather than to have a better public image, which is very subjective, and could be argued in many different ways.
Well, in view of what Melanie just said, might we want to add this policy to the list of things that need to be reconsidered somewhat? So I happen to agree with Melanie. I think it could be read to discourage transparency.
I'm more than happy to have the board reconsider 2.6.9, because maybe you're exactly right. Like, there's so many different ways to look at this, and it probably should have another kind of consideration for you as a board about what actually is it that we want to be saying here, and why. Again, it's under asset protection. So does it belong here at all? Because that was part of what we went around and around about. But then I was like, well, it's here, so I'm going to interpret it. And you can see how quickly it just sort of could go south. So I'm certainly comfortable with the policy committee looking at this, or you as a board looking at this and determining what you actually want to do with it.
Mel, did you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah, just that knowing that the idea of policy governance, and when we originally looked at it, it wasn't something that was specifically tailored towards school boards. We kind of retrofit something that was more corporate based. And I can totally see in a corporation, you want to nick somebody that makes your stocks go down, but that's not the game we're playing. So I would love to add that to the discussion.
Jim?
Now, just personally, I think the reputation and image of the district is a hugely important asset. So I think, having something in there with respect, we're kind of going down a couple of different rabbit holes in relation to this, and that makes it very difficult. But I think conceptually, this is a very useful thing to have, and maybe we just need to rework it to make it fit what we really mean. But I think image and reputation are huge assets, and we've seen that in individual districts head south and how much that can have an impact. We just don't want that for our overall system.
So is there a general agreement that this is a policy that ought to be revisited then? All right. Any other comments or questions on the superintendent's report here?
Do we need to have a motion? I never can remember which comes first, accept or adopt. I think it's accept.
I think here it would be accept, yeah.
Then I move we accept the policy, and then that postpones the adopt the interpretation to the next meeting.
Oh, well, I think it's already a policy. I think what we need to do is we need to act on what the superintendent has.
That's what I meant.
Okay. So do you want to rephrase that?
I move that we accept the superintendent's interpretation and evidence as presented.
All right. Is there a second? Seconded by Jim. And is there further discussion? Because there could be. Seeing none, however. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. All right.
I have one other question,
Dick. Yep.
and that is, since we as a board are a policy governance, we tend not to go to committees. We don't have a formal policy committee unless the board needs a discussion of language, which is rather a waste of time. So if the board wants the policy group to reassemble, we're already doing that. with respect to some other issues, to consider the language and make a proposal, we could do that. But most policy changes are supposed to be full board discussions.
Anybody else want to comment? Mel, go ahead.
Only that now that we are a new board, we maybe should also just revisit the policy group and make sure that everyone that was formerly is still currently interested, and if anybody new, etc., wants to join.
Might we want to do that at our next meeting, since hopefully by then we'll have the 2 missing board seats filled?
I'm okay with that.
Okay. In my pile of papers, I seem to have buried the agenda, but I will find it. Here it is. Okay. So I think we're done with item 7, and now we go into the incidental information, which includes the search for principal and the monthly update.
I will combine these since I've talked about the principal search in my monthly update. But I just want to let you know that we are working through this process. I'm meeting with. I met last week with Floodbrook staff to talk to them about what they're looking for in a superintendent. I mean, in a principal. And tomorrow I'm meeting with families. I've got a meeting at 5 o'clock with Floodbrook families to go through the same exercise I did with the staff. Then I'll be pulling all that information together, and that will become a document that guides the search committee's work. So this is what the community has identified as traits and values and skills that they're looking for, and then this is that will guide the work. So the position closes on Friday, and I'm in the final stages of pulling the committee together. Early next week, we'll decide on candidates, and then interviews will be the week of the 22nd. There'll be it's a pretty comprehensive process that I'll be using. There'll be some performance tasks, meeting with students, and an interview with the interview committee. I'll be looking for recommendations depending on the number of people that we interview, of the top 2 or 3 candidates, to come and do a final interview with Herb and myself the last week. I think it's like the 30th, the week of the 30th. So we can hope to have somebody selected by the beginning of April. So we're in process. Any questions about that?
Yeah, any questions?
Okay.
Ben?
I was just curious about the posting process, and I don't want to delve too far into details because this is not a policy governance piece, but I'm curious about it. I have been sitting with a group, a statewide group working on diversifying the educator workforce.
Mhm.
And I don't know if Randy, you were able to attend any of those webinars or have access to the resource that group put out, but that was a state working group. And that put out a whole position, sort of not a position paper, but a whole resource session on recruiting, retaining, hiring, supporting people of color into positions in schools. And so I was just sort of curious, with our equity as one of our goals, like that's how I see this fitting in. It's just sort of checking in on that process and how you address that.
Sure. So Laura Walkinshaw, our new human resources director, has been doing a lot of that work. So she's been connecting with people at the state level. She has also reached out to DEI coordinators in other regions of New England to get ideas about how people are diversifying their workforce. So she's done quite a few things. I don't have, she's attended meetings with educators and leaders. Not sure if she's been a part of exactly what you're talking about, but she's been networking to try to reach out to more people and to reach out to more places to hire. So I don't know. I'm trying to think about, for this particular position, where the places are that we ended up posting. We know for sure it's School Spring. We were looking other places too, and I'm not sure where it landed. I'm happy to look into that further for you. But she's actively working on that for recruitment processes. This, she only started the 3rd week in January, so the timing of all of this was pretty early in her tenure as she's trying to get up to speed with COVID. So she may not have made the headway that we had hoped as we're looking ahead, but she's focusing a lot on that for our system in general.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Mel? No, okay. I thought I heard somebody say something, but I don't see a hand up. Jim?
Yeah, so is this just on the hiring process or on the full superintendent report?
Well, let's stick with hiring process for the moment. Okay.
Then I pass.
Okay. I have one question. I guess it would be for Randy.
Sure.
Do you see an interplay between the policy governance policies and how a initial screening committee it's constituted? Did you find that our policies gave you any guidance about that?
No. That doesn't mean it's not there. But there wasn't anything that jumped out at me about directing or guiding that process.
It's in the control of the superintendent. Any other position besides the superintendent, we don't interact and we don't second guess. So the process that whatever superintendent chooses is up to the superintendent under policy governance.
Well, that's the reason I asked the question is I without going through all the policies in number 2, I couldn't tell whether there was anything in there that gave a superintendent any guidance about how to go about screening. And it just occurred to me because I was wondering whether any schools in Vermont have ever included high school or even college students from the area as part of a screening team.
I know that there are certainly students who've been a part of the process at different levels in systems and schools. There's nothing, I mean, but I would say that my experience is that every system approaches the hiring process differently. For this one, I pulled processes that were, I think, the most effective over the course of my career for this. This is different than we've ever done it in the BRSU, but it's tied to what I've seen practices be to get the strongest candidates in over my time. So there's nothing that kind of lays out a process that people should or should not use.
Thanks. Anything else on the principal search before we come to Jim's question about the report in general? Okay, Jim, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was just interested in the recovery plan template.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding was kind of that it was meant to be a recovery plan certainly for our students, but also for our school staff.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the case?
I have no idea. Nobody's seen it yet. So we have not seen the template. The committee needs to be established by March 15th, and we still don't have a copy of the template. The template, the needs assessment needs to be completed by April 15th, but I don't know what that means. And the plan needs to be in place by May 15th. So I'm working on assembling the team right now. We know the 3 areas that are going to be covered in the plan, but we don't have any information at all right now yet.
Okay.
So it's sort of like assembling a team, but you don't know whether they have to play tennis or field hockey?
They've given us recommendations for the people that we should consider having on the committee. But there's nothing that obligates you to follow it. Of note to me was that there was not a teacher listed on that list. So we will have a teacher. But so there's just not a lot to go on right now. And it's a very tight turnaround, and it's intended to guide our work over the next, for sure, year, probably 2 years. but we're poised and ready to do what we need to do. We just don't have a lot of information.
Dick?
Randy, you shared with the small group of BRSU goal assessors and leaders when this policy was less than 12 hours old, that your inclination was to follow pretty much the kind of protocols to get information and in the various divisions that you've done, that you followed last summer in planning this particular year. And so I think the state has once again created an impossible time schedule, but we have a superintendent who is going to manage it despite them.
Yeah, we'll get it done. We will definitely get it done. It's just I don't have. I really wish I had a whole lot more to offer you right now than I do. I would say that another piece I wanted to highlight that is not in my report is I want to just update you on the vaccine information. For those of you who have not heard, I will say at this moment in time that I feel very grateful to be living in Bennington County, because the hospital has done a very, very good job. I believe the best in the state at setting up 3 vaccine clinics, March 13th, March 20th, and March 27th for school employees who work in Bennington County. And the process of signing up for those was smoother than any place else in the state. I was on a meeting with superintendents today, and their level of frustration, if I were to tell you the stories of what other superintendents and districts have had to deal with, is nothing. The hospital took complete control of this. They're doing 600 to 700 vaccines each of those 3 Saturdays. The rollout was smooth and easy. From my understanding, every single one of our employees who wanted a vaccine appointment has one. And people are feeling really, really good. So I wanted to share that with you and to make sure to just really commend you for the work that you did to support making this happen. I truly believe that every single push and every single piece of encouragement made a difference. And, we could look at it from a whole lot of different lenses, but you made this happen. And I on behalf of the entire SU, I want to thank you again for everything you did. People are feeling good. For the first time, there's a lightness. People are starting to get vaccinated. I talked to somebody today, had their first shot. The vaccines on those 3 days are the Johnson & Johnson, the clinics here, which means it's 1 shot. And then 2 weeks after that, we're done. So that poises our system to be in very good shape by mid-April. So I wanted to make sure to give you an update on that because it was not in my report.
Yeah. Jim?
Yep. Sorry. Had also on the package page 24, equity.
Yep.
On that, it sounded like you're having some difficulty getting an equity audit organization. I just wanted to kind of, the VSBA now, there's a equity page with a lot of links, and I don't know if you've tried to use them, but we can probably get a bit of an assist on, finding some of those resources from VSBA. And I'm happy to help you with that or whatever.
Yeah, thank you. I will have an update tomorrow. There were meetings this afternoon with, I believe, 3 different equity organizations who do audits. And then I know there's a 4th one that's being set up as well. So I should have information. I'm optimistic that one of these will pan out. If not, I am certainly welcome to any leads and any recommendations. Many of the people who we've known in the last few years have engaged in that process in the state are no longer doing it. So we had hit a lot of road bumps, but we're sticking with it. We're expanding out, to other places outside of Vermont, and we're willing to do what we need to do to make it happen.
Jim?
Just as a follow-up, I mean, equity is also the big issue at VSBA for the year. And so I just kind of suggest to everybody on the board, take a look at it's actually a new page on the VSBA website it's all about equity, and it's got a lot of good information and links and all. So it's I know Ben Freeman will enjoy it.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak on that topic? Going back one comment, I wonder whether would it be appropriate for the minutes to reflect that a number of staff of the T&G schools have written to us, thanking us for the letter that Lee drafted, and we appreciate their feedback. Looks like I
Yes.
see a general nodding here. Celeste, could that be in the minutes that we received a number of communications from staff regarding the letter and that we appreciate hearing from them?
Will do.
Ben.
I was just curious, Brandy, if you could, I didn't notice in your report if there was any comment about shifting plans to post in April to try to go back to full in-person for all students. And I know that's been a big part of the governor's push. And I don't think it's in the fits within the recovery plan that you were talking about directly, but I don't know if that's in conversation or not, especially with vaccines rolling in.
Right. No, it's definitely in conversation. It's a very good question. The language you just used is also part of what is up for discussion in the entire state. What does it mean to return to in-person learning? What we know and understand is that the biggest concern around that is related to students who are only still in school 2 days a week. We don't have that. We are actually, considered full in person. We know that we're in 4 days in all of our schools. On Wednesdays, we have 20 to 25% of our students in on Wednesdays. The rub for us right now, and this is where I'm needing to make some decisions, is that our teachers and staff need the space to be able to curate and create lessons when we've got remote learners. So I have committed to our community that we would have a remote learning option. So if I'm going to give up Wednesdays, it means I need to say to all of our families of remote learners, this is no longer an option for you. You either need to enroll in home study or you need to come in person. I'm very reluctant to do that. I wouldn't say that the door is closed, but that does not feel to me like the right step for what we've been as a system. So I'm very hesitant to make that move. And if I don't make that move, then I can't tell our staff, you're no longer going to have the time to create the lessons. So that's I would say fairly much where I am. Something still might change on Wednesdays in some capacity, but when I think about the scale of the rollout, I believe the message is, hey, we want our kids to be in more than 2 days a week. We want to increase in-person learning, and comes with that comes this also challenge, because the guidance says that we need to maintain 6 feet between those students. And so what they're facing at the high school and what we're facing at the middle school is, how can you bring them back if you can't maintain the distance? And then we know that when the teachers are vaccinated, that's one piece of a healthier system. But those people can be carriers. They can expose students potentially who could go home and expose their parents. Or we know students. So it's a very complex, you're getting an insight into the many things I'm thinking about right now. I know that I can tell you that I face a lot of people coming at this from sort of one angle, without having an understanding of the real comprehensive nature of this as a topic. So I don't have an answer. Yes, I'm thinking about it. It is very unlikely that I will land on going back Wednesdays full day, unless there's something that really pushes me into that in a way that I don't expect to happen.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I really just sort of appreciate the way that you're approaching that decision. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Let me put Sam on the spot for just a moment here. I'm wondering, Sam, whether, and I realize we're talking BBA, not elementary schools and so on, but do you have any sense from either what you've seen or from what your classmates are seeing about steps to go back to so-called normal that are working, or things that aren't working that might help us figure out what to do?
Yeah. So first I wanted to mention a lot of my teachers, 2 of which I know today, got their first vaccine, and they like left class and they were all excited about it and they were talking about it, especially my biology teacher. Like, we had a lesson about the mRNA vaccines. And as of going back to normalcy, from what I can tell, I'm still in a hybrid, but a lot of people I know are switching back to full in person. And it's interesting now because there is a maximum classroom capacity. I know in my history class, there's one kid who is in person, but has to go to the library and Zoom in just because there's not enough room to maintain distance. And that's a concern for some people as well, like to not want to go full in person again. But like, I have classes that only have 3 kids remote now because everyone is just in the room. So I think there is a switch back because you have the option to apply to go full in person at BBA. But I think, yeah, the distance is the main problem because we just can't maintain it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else on any topic that was in the superintendent's report? The next item is on the second page of the agenda.
Melanie, did you want to say something?
I'm
I just
sorry.
wanted to say thank you to Randy for putting it together. It was thorough, extensive, loads of work, and easy to get through. It was colloquial enough for us non-lawyers in the group. So thank you for that.
Welcome.
It's pretty good for the lawyers in the group too.
I also think it's encouraging to see because last fall when the principals all came and spoke to us, they were all concerned about a rise in behavior problems, and to see that some of those have decreased now.
Significant decrease across our entire system. And that's true of many, many places. So it's a great point. Part of what schools will be talking about over the next couple months is what's actually worked well this year that we're going to keep. And I expect there to be some discussions around what are some of these practices that have prevented some, those points where we had high levels of behavioral dysregulation or infractions that we're no longer seeing, and how might we keep that in place. I'm really excited about what's to come. I'm not, you don't get to see sort of I love teaching and learning, and we have been talking the last couple of months. I've been working with principals about looking ahead and the work we're doing. And I'm just so looking forward to it. I am starting to feel some real positive energy around where we're going and what we're doing. And I can see the principals really working on owning their buildings and what are we doing? And it is so nice to feel that energy again, where this year it's just been missing because it's been cloaked by so many other things. And to see and feel it reemerging is going to motivate me a lot by the end of this year, because it feels really good. So there's a lot in the iReady data. It offers so much rich information for all of us right now, and we're still learning about all the different reports and the ways you can look at the data. So we got some initial information because they didn't have a lot of turnaround. Testing just ended before February break, and then they had to pull this together. So we only had a couple weeks, but I can guarantee you that as we all continue to learn about iReady, you're going to see more interesting information, and the schools will be using it in a way that we haven't been able to use data before. So anyway, I derailed us, but this is why we're here, right? The teaching and learning is why we're here. So I'm done now, Herb. Sorry. Thank you.
No apology. Jane.
I was curious, and I may have just not read it in depth, but whenever I was reading through the report on the ODRs and stuff, I guess one of the things I've heard throughout the state is that although some of the behaviors have gone down, that perhaps that might be attributed to kids dropping out or truancy in part. Can you comment about that?
I can. I would say that is not likely. That's not the correlation we have. Yes, we are having, we do have some students who are off our radar. I'm in the middle, actually this week, collecting specific details around these few kids, and it's not a lot who are off. And I will be engaging with those families directly. So we don't have a high school, which is, I believe, the area in which they're seeing the highest numbers of disengagement and get kids who have kind of, the term they're using is ghosted. But I will have a very good sense of exactly who those kids are. Our teacher schools have been working very, very hard to engage, to provide services, supports, and structure. And at times when we need to contact agencies to help us out, we're doing that. So our numbers aren't what they are in a lot of other places. I'm expecting at this point to have like fewer than, I bet, 5 families that we're really talking about that are off our radar, which is not bad. And I intend on visiting those homes in the next few weeks. So
thanks for that, because I think it really helps to make more meaningful interpretation of the data.
Right, and to contextualize it to our situation. Yeah, I mean, I spent time with MEMS today, going through kid by kid by kid, getting an understanding where things were. And when you're focusing at that level on it's nice. There are a lot of places that wouldn't be able to discuss it at that level.
Before we move on to the item 9 on the agenda, is there anything else that relates to the superintendent's report? Under item 9, the first thing is review and to determine board management, delegation, and governance process policies. Dick?
One of the things that we promised last meeting, and unfortunately things just got too busy out of hand, so that the small policy subgroup, that would be Mel, Jane, Deb, myself, and who else? Oh, Herb attended for a while. Didn't actually create a detailed map kind of going forward, but in the packet, all sorts of recommendations that flow from Val's book, that flow from other thoughts, have been engaged in. If any of the board members want, and they also included each of the 3.0 up and 4.0 up policies. And so therefore, we propose to get together and develop a more defined, as we promised that we would, for the April meeting. And if there are board members, please email me or Jane or Deb or Melanie your thoughts with respect to which ones you'd like to consider first. We are responsible for them all, and we've done no work on any of them.
Thank you, Dick. Any questions or comments on that? Just one thing I'd like to call folks' attention to. If you look at packet page 38, which is something that our consultant Val passed out a year and a half, 2 years ago, I noticed that one of the things under one possible process for the board says, for each policy in the governance process and board executive linkage policies, the chair assigns the individual policy to individual board members. And I'm just thinking you might want to ponder that and get in touch with Dick or anybody else on the subgroup and say what do you think about that? Is that a realistic way to handle it? Is it an efficient way to handle it?
I was going to say that reading from Val was one of the many that she gave us. That happened to be the shortest one. If anybody is interested in some of the others, I can dig them out. They're along the same vein, but they have other suggestions also. But they're long.
Yeah, this one sort of jumped out at me because it would involve each board member sort of taking over responsibility for some policy or part of a policy. And I'm not sure what folks think about that. So if you think of something about it, I'd say let Dick know. All right, reflection on the informational hearing and the election. Dick.
I think that the information hearing was an absolute wonderful success. I thought that you were succinct. I thought your answers were wonderful. I thought Randy was remarkably informative. I think Sue, you did a great job. But I think the person who absolutely set the tone for an amazing Zoom meeting was Oliver. He just did a phenomenal job. Several of us said, you know, it's not fair that the moderator is the only person who doesn't receive a remuneration. And I would like to put in a future agenda the discussion of getting a warned article for next year so that there will be remuneration for the moderator. What the moderator chooses to do with it, it's up to the moderator, but it's certainly important. On another issue, the election issue, I received a large number of comments here in Londonderry that despite our effort to inform, people had no clue when the ballot was due, mostly because our town meeting is in May, and no clue, they said, what they were voting for. No clue how the voting mechanism work. Now, I wrote a long article and put it in the Londonderry Community Forum. And still, there are people who had no real clear understanding. Hopefully, our community interaction will cause me to reach out even more. I was even thinking that perhaps for Londonderry, I need to walk the streets and actually pretend I'm running for office so that I can get people to engage. But because the distance is fairly large, it's 19 square miles, I'd have to start in July.
Anybody else have, Mel?
I would say the same thing. I'm not sure what happened and what fell through the cracks, and it's worth revisiting next year. But just getting people to vote and knowing that it was voting day, it seemed to creep up and happen out of nowhere. And I, for the life of me, can't remember if in the past we've had signs on the side of the road that we need to communicate with our select board and help and ask if, can we get that sign up earlier in the week so that just to remind people. But for some reason, the publicity was not out there across the board. So I absolutely, I think you're right about that. And I don't know what it was, but worth revisiting. And when you said, back to your first comment about the moderator, remuneration is a word I don't use. I assume that means financial compensation. I wonder, as much as I think he would deserve such a thing, I do wonder if that's kind of falls under the, it's not included because he should not appear biased, whoever that moderator is, to be working for us as a board, that they are there as a servant of the community and not a servant of the board. Just a thought as to how that goes. But I would certainly be, I think it'd be great for us to write a letter of thanks to him, and even maybe go so far as to publicly acknowledge him, put just a letter to the editor or something in the paper, because I do believe he did a really great service to us. Hosting a Zoom meeting is not easy. He did great, and it made it bearable when you can't see real faces. So yeah, thank you.
Well, if the board would like me to write a letter of thanks and perhaps circulate a letter to the editor rather than just send it in without any input, I can certainly do that if you all agree and Celeste puts it in the minutes, so I remember I'm supposed to do it. Is that what folks want, Ben?
Yeah, no, other folks can it looks like you got a bunch of thumbs up, and I'm fine with that. I did want to just sort of not disagree, but sort of flip the way we look at the how that meeting went, and just ask us to think about what our goals are with those sorts of meetings, because I would say in terms of community engagement and participation, it was pretty poor. And I think that has been the norm for annual meetings for the school board for years, in person, as well as now doing it virtually. And I think if our goal is purely to answer some specific questions about the budget and to make a specific presentation about that, and not to make any waves and have people pass our budget, then we succeeded. But in terms of getting new people to understand what the heck this is all about, and how the decisions are made about our school budget and what goes into it and all the rest of it, I don't think we did a very good job. But I don't think that was our express intent, and going into it. But I do think, as a I sort of found myself listening in, and as a board member, knowing that I probably wouldn't be asked to say anything in that meeting. So I was just sort of in observation mode at a certain point, and saying, would this engage me as a member of the public? Would this be interesting? What would in this would draw me to want to participate in the school board, in the schools, if I'm not a parent, or if I'm not somebody who has a heightened financial concern related to taxes, and it wasn't there. So I just I would love us for us to be thinking next year, and I think I made a comment about this last year too, following the annual meeting, just saying that it would be in the spirit of community engagement, if there are ways for us to be sharing what's really going on in schools, to and making that sort of like that human connection to what we're doing, and having that be something that perhaps it's a way to engage people in another way, without making the meeting a day long, obviously, which we wouldn't get people either. But it was a really efficient meeting. It was very, sort of like in terms of like, we're going to get through an agenda and we're going to get this passed, and we're not going to get people objecting, because it's really clear, and the questions are answered very clearly and professionally, which all of that was true. It was highly successful. But in terms of like, from an educator's perspective, like when I go to a Zoom meeting that's about learning, there's often breakout rooms where you go into a smaller session and people are able to ask questions and talk about what this means for what they're grappling with, what they're dealing with, what their issues are. And those are, again, this is outside of the let's pass the budget meeting, but it really made me think about what are we doing? What are our opportunities to engage more people with our process? So
Jim, and then Jane.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of, my 2 cents. It would be great if we had more people. It would also be great to make it to make people understand a little bit more what was going on in schools. I think historically, though, people have looked at the annual meeting largely as a budget meeting and asking questions. And just on that front, I think, we've got to acknowledge, one, the fabulous work that was done on the annual report to answer all those questions in advance. And, I think that could potentially answer people's questions so they don't have to come. In reality, we'd still love to have people come and to tell them what's actually going on in the schools. So I second Ben's idea for trying to put something into it about informing the community of what's going on in our schools. But as you say, you've got so much time and all that, and that's our community engagement job year round. So,
Jane?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking, it would be fun to have taken that community engagement, those 2 questions, and maybe had just a little bit of time where people could have broke out and talked about those questions, and so I kind of felt like that was a missed opportunity when we had more community there. I want to say though that like going into the town meeting though, separate from the school board, it was interesting because school stuff came up and we actually had more turnout in our Zoom meeting in Peru than they said that we've had in our regular town meetings. I mean, it was almost, I think, twice as much, I think, is what people said. So it was kind of interesting.
Randy?
I just want to just share with you, kind of in the spirit of the reflection, that I received about a half a dozen, might have been like 7 people who reached out to me, people who either watched a recording, watched it on YouTube, or were at the meeting, saying that they really appreciated the content, that for the first time they understood the development of the budget and the tax rate information. They'd never really understood it, and that it was more accessible to them. So people, I don't know, I have no history, so I don't know how typical it is for people to reach out to the superintendent and give that feedback. I don't know if that's a high number, but just in the spirit of reflection, I felt like I would share that with you. And also to just say that, you know, I really took to heart a year ago when we met and heard the feedback about really, you know, bringing the learning experience to the annual meeting. And so just, I want you to know moving forward that is for sure a part that I want to continue. This year was obviously a set of circumstances that were not what we had. We tried to include pictures. I asked principals to write their statements from a real, find their voice, not have it be formal, but be personable. You know, I showed the video, like we're trying to bring stuff into this, and we'll continue to do that on our end. And so I just think as we move forward, those are some, I guess, sort of reflective comments that I wanted to share with you. So we're gonna, you know, I even struggle with the volume of the annual report, which I know is really comprehensive, but I mean, it's like a doozy of a document. And I keep thinking, does it really need to be this? And it probably does, because that's the feedback I keep getting. But, you know, how do we make it all kind of more accessible? So we'll continue to explore that more from our office.
Anybody else? Anybody have any thoughts on the overall turnout? I was just doing some rough math. It looks to me like last year about 3,500 people cast votes in the district elections, and this year was more like a little under 3,000. I have no idea how that's sugared off town by town. Melanie?
You know, I skipped a couple of years here on the school board, but I honestly think, I don't know that we've ever gotten townwide numbers the same way that we did when we were individual districts. I think that's still kind of a thing we need to rebuild. I know in Sunderland, when we would have, you know, our own individual school board meeting in Sunderland, either before or after the town meeting. Obviously we're Zooming now, but especially if it was before the town meeting, we had a considerable number more people. When it was after, a lot of them would leave. But having that pairing really helped have more of an audience. And I think we're still kind of repairing that divide that was just caused by us, you know, joining, now only being at Floodbrook or at MEMS or wherever. It's just not, you know, like I said, it's just a rift that we have to repair.
Thank you. Dick?
I think it's very important to note that when the schools is perceived to be doing a really good job, it tends to lower the participation. And I think that large part of the reason why even people got the ballot, many of them thought that they were junk mail. I saw a bunch in the Londonderry transfer station, but also people, the vote was overwhelmingly positive. And there's just some confusion over how the vote really worked. But I don't think we have an extraordinary perception out there that we're not being responsible. I think the perception is that we are responsible, that our kids are very happy doing what they're doing despite COVID, and that part of the turnout in a Board of Education vote is dependent on a little bit of controversy.
Any other thoughts? Okay. The next item is to appoint board members to fill vacancies. We have 2 vacancies. One is the Manchester seat and one is the Town seat. Dick?
I move that John Wilson, who received more than 30 write-in ballots, but not only 28 for the Manchester seat, therefore technically not qualified, be appointed to the Manchester seat, and that Lindsay Ralph, who came on at the very last second, making it very difficult to get write-in votes, who's volunteered to run. Both candidates resigned from the board because they were getting more responsibility and had things that they had to do. So when they volunteered, they added a bit of a codicil that they might not be able to attend full meetings or may had to miss an occasional meeting or 2. But they're both experienced board members, and we congratulated them in February for their incredible service. So I move both of them.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Ben. Okay. And I think did everybody get Randy's tabulation of what the write-in votes were?
No.
I believe
it just came to the executive committee.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Just for some background, for the Town seat, there were a number of people who and 3 write-ins for the Town seat, except for John Wilson, who we are now nominating for the Manchester seat anyway. So if we were just going by vote totals, there's nobody that got more than Lindsay did that we're considering for the Town seat. Mel.
I guess I don't understand why. Maybe there's a conversation that was had that I wasn't privy to, but why would we be nominating people that have resigned and don't want to participate and know that they have limited use? It almost just feels like abusive to make them stay on here when they don't feel like they have the time. And
No,
maybe it's because I don't know of something else.
They came back and I think wrote Herb and said that they would volunteer.
Okay.
That's right. And Dick is also right that they did say that on account of the reasons why they had not stood for re-election or election, they have some other pressures. They can't guarantee they're going to be at every meeting, but they would be willing to serve.
But I guess I still don't. I guess I would still wonder though why we wouldn't. I don't know. I'm a little conflicted about this. I just feel like there is still time to put a call out to the community. I know that we've had other people that have been interested in this role before, and because we work through a straw poll, which is a very fair system, or not straw poll, but whatever, our pulling out of the hat system, that haven't been elected. There just might be some other energy out there, and I guess I'm just a little curious if maybe that wouldn't be really something to consider.
Well, whatever vacancies we fill are filled only until next year's town meeting day. Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Herb. When I decided to run for this for the board, at that time I wasn't aware of any family complications. And now tonight, my first meeting, there are 2. John Wilson is my son. It's certainly inappropriate for me to vote on his election to the board, I think. So I'll be abstaining. again, hopefully this isn't a pattern. I'll have to abstain. I guess you put them together, Dick, the motion for both parties.
I could separate them if
Right.
that would be
If
more
you separate it,
comfortable
that
to
would
you.
be great, because I'd certainly be fine voting for the other individual, but not my son. So I just want to.
Then I accept that friendly amendment.
Great. Just
To
want
make
to make
them
that
two
clear
separate motions.
and be transparent. Thank you.
And I
As
forget
long
who-
as the seconder agrees.
Yeah, I forget who seconded. Celeste, who seconded Dick's motion?
Ben,
Ben did. Okay, Ben, is that okay with you? And should we take up the first part of Dick's motion first, which was to appoint John Wilson to the seat reserved for a resident of Manchester? Just, okay, it sounds like that's all right. Just on that, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. And any abstentions? Okay, it passes with 2 abstentions, and the record should reflect that one of them is Jeff.
Thank you.
All right, now we have the second part of Dick's motion, which would be to appoint Lindsay Ralph to the 4-town seat. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining? Okay, that passes with 2 abstentions. All right, and Randy, you or somebody in your office will be letting them know, will you?
Yes, we will take care of that.
Okay. And last thing we have in the packet is the revised work plan.
no legislative. Excuse me.
No.
You're right.
No.
You're right. I
Wait.
skipped.
There's a lot of emptiness, but I just wanted you to be able to take a look at it. I reformatted it just in a way that I felt was a little bit easier to read, but it will be more populated as we move to next meeting.
And by then, we'll probably have proposed dates for accepting any reviewed policy governance policies.
Yes, that will be included in there.
Right. Anything else before we move on to legislative and regulatory? All right. Anybody have any comments on actions by the legislature or the secretary or anything else regulatory? Jim.
I just wanted to let people know that, there is a whole lot of activity in the legislature with respect to education issues. Surprising amount continues to be. We had weighed in on a couple of things. One of them was H81, which is statewide healthcare, school employee healthcare bargaining. I kind of want to let you all know that, we had sent a letter to the House and then a letter to the Senate because it's in Senate Ed now. Actually, I think I should have probably sent it out in advance, but everything happened kind of quickly. I actually testified in Senate Ed today on H81, and I've got my written testimony that I'll send to y'all guys is totally consistent with the position we had taken before and letters we had sent, but I'll send it to you guys so you can see it. It's a fun process of spending 3.5 hours in a Senate Ed Zoom for giving 10 minutes of commentary. But there were a variety of people there. The chair of South Burlington, the person who used to head up VHI, anyway, there were a group of people who testified. There's more to come. We're trying to make some headway on improving the process for statewide healthcare bargaining. Specifically some improvements to the arbitration process. There actually have been some things that have been won, minor things, but we'd like to see more happen. But I'll keep you posted. It's still in process. The other thing in Senate Ed right now is actually the the pupil weighting factors, that, changing those, that, that could have a significant impact on some of our districts. That's, it looks likely to be going towards a study and a plan for, a study that would make recommendations in January 22. So it looks like it'll be a little way out there, but there are a lot of people who are pushing very hard to get that instituted earlier. Also, Kathleen James has her community schools bill, which seems to be making progress through House Ed, and literacy bills are a big item. But Randy would probably know more about that than me. So there's a lot going on, too much going on up there. But I actually listened because I was stuck on the meeting. House Agriculture is pushing for this big bill, which in a lot of ways I like it, but it's the idea is to have a whole lot more local foods in schools, plus turn it to essentially we now have for introduced lunch that would be for everybody is the thought. And the Dan French was in there as Secretary of Ed saying that would cost $50 million a year. The guy from the Senate Ag Committee said, oh, maybe only 24 million a year. So there's a lot of stuff going on that could actually have implications for us. So we'll try to keep on top of it, but everybody should be aware that this is the final week before crossover. So essentially, we should know at the end of this week what is really likely to potentially impact us in the future. So
thank you, Jim. Ben.
I was just commenting in. Jim mentioned Kath James is the legislation that she put out on community schools, and I just got a note from her earlier tonight saying that they did vote it out of committee, so it's off to appropriations now, which means we'll see what they do with it, but it has a chance of making it through to crossover. There's also I haven't heard whether it's moved or not, but there's a youth advisory council bill that's in the House as well. That was being pushed by the Vermont After School Coalition, amongst others. But it's an interesting piece that would create a youth advisory committee for the legislature and the governor, and to be fully staffed by Vermont youth age 11 to 18. So this would have potential for our students in our district to be participating in. So it's just another really powerful youth voice piece of legislation that's out there right now. And it's got some good support, and it's not going to cost a lot of money. So hopefully it might go through and make it.
Thanks, Ben. Anything else on legislative or regulatory? Seeing none. Any future agenda items aside from the ones we've already identified? Not seeing any. If you do think of one, let either me or Dick or David know. We'll get it on an agenda. And Celeste, do we have any public other than Bob?
No.
Okay, so I guess I won't bother announcing a public comment period then. Let's take a moment to reflect on our norms, which are, I think, packet page 4 or so, roughly. If anybody's identified a norm that we have violated, now's a good time to point it out.
Anytime is a good time to point it out. This is a specific time that we set aside in each meeting. But if anybody's got any problem with any of the goals or norms and wants more consideration, let's get it on a little bit deeper into the agenda.
Yep. All right. The superintendent has requested, and well, I think we already voted actually, that we would add to the agenda an executive session regarding personnel.
So I move we go in
before that.
I move we go into executive session for the purposes of a personnel issue.
Okay, Dick has moved for executive session for personnel issue. Is there a second? Seconded by Jane, all right?
And you may want to announce, Herb, as you usually do, that the meeting, all we're going to do is come out of the executive session and adjourn.
Right, for the benefit of those of us who are either not entitled to attend an executive session or some public that may be watching by Zoom, I suppose. Okay, so take a moment, I guess, Celeste, to organize, well, to,
I am just going to stop recording
yeah,
and I'm gonna basically kick, everybody that's not a board member would just leave.
Yep.
And then you guys would, and then Randy, I'm gonna make you the host before I leave as well.